Welcome to the AE911Truth Webinar series. This is the second of our webinars to be broadcast here, so I'm happy that everybody is here to listen. And Richard Gage is going to be the one giving the presentation here in a few minutes. He's running a little late. There's been some technical difficulties, but they are being worked out at the moment. So I thought that I would come on at this time to tell you essentially what the goals are of these webinars and how you can help out if you are interested in this issue and furthering the cause and getting the word out about this important evidence that you're going to be seeing today. The purpose of these webinars is to inform the public and create a venue for which you out there who may already be aware of the issue of the controversy surrounding the 3 towers that fell in New York on 9/11, that you can point them to come and essentially listen to the presentation and interact with Richard Gage and ask questions. In fact, if you look at the page right now, you'll see there's a question box on there where you can submit your questions, and you can, we'll read them. And if it's a good question, and we certainly want challenging questions, we want the skeptical questions, fact-based, we will address them right here. So this is an opportunity for you to bring somebody, point them in the direction of these webinars, and let them listen, let them interact, and basically, be a part of this this important time in history, and decide for themselves whether or not the issue should be pursued, and whether or not we need to do more with the 9/11 investigation here 15 years after the event took place. So I want to thank you guys for being here and for caring enough about 9/11 Truth to get the word out. And my rule, like I always say on my show, 9/11 Free Falls, when you come to a presentation, something that Richard Gage is giving the World Trade Center 7 evidence or Twin Towers evidence somewhere, you need to bring a friend, bring somebody that is not aware of this issue, somebody that is bringing a skeptical eye to the topic, and is it doesn't necessarily have a dog in the fight yet. All right, so I always say, bring that skeptical brother-in-law or that significant other who may have only heard you talk about this, and let them challenge us and give us as much information as they can, about any challenges that they may have had. So we're going to be encouraging that. And also, too, at the end of this presentation, we're going to be talking about volunteer opportunities, things you can do to help us get the word out to the people it matters to, people in Congress, people at professional organizations, those places. Now, I'm hearing some bells ringing, so I think Richard Gage is ready to start the presentation. So without further ado, I'm going to hand the microphone over to him, and I'll talk to you guys at the end of this presentation. Richard.
Yes, Andy, thanks so much. We've got the bells ringing, and welcome again to AE911Truth, where we have now 2,500 almost architects and engineers calling for a new investigation of the destruction of the World Trade Center skyscrapers on 9/11. And today, as Andy may have mentioned, the third skyscraper is the one in question. And I didn't even know about this for 4 years after 9/11. I'm an architect. I work very hard to stay up with current events, and turns out that 90% of architects and engineers across this country know nothing about the third tower. And I'm honored to be in a position to bring this information to your attention today. And so this webinar series is designed just for that. And we start with, because it is one of the most puzzling, catastrophic structural failures in the history of modern architecture. Speaking of modern architecture, I just wanted you to know a little bit about myself too. I have been an architect for 28 years. I've worked on these $3 and $10 million gymnasiums in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I'm joined by more than 2,000 other architects and engineers, 2,500 as I mentioned almost, all not just puzzled, but adamant that we get a real investigation of the destruction of these of all three skyscrapers. And so if you're an architect or engineer, consider joining us as you review this evidence. And most people are quite amazed at what they find. And so we hope you will be too. We'll have a question and answer period at the end of our 45-minute discussion here, in which we review Building 7. We went into some length to introduce the building to you last week. This week we'll review that, but we'll also go into the American Society of Civil Engineers, FEMA, and the NIST reports in a little more depth, looking specifically at the NIST computer simulation, which is how they intended to prove their theory. We'll look at the fires in more detail today that were in and around, in this particular building, and look at some of what the engineers are actually saying about the destruction of this building. So let's get started right now. We do have a website, by the way. It is AE911Truth. Many of you are looking at this broadcast after the fact, may not have had a chance to review our website. And so we want you to be able to do that at AE911Truth.org. Now, we use a scientific method in order to examine this problem. What happens in the scientific method? We have a question: how do the towers come down? What we do is we do some background research. How have other towers come down? We make some observations. We construct a hypothesis, our best guess. Did they come down by fire, controlled demolition, or what? We lay out all the opportunities to educate ourselves and to come up with the best possible truth about what happened. We test these hypotheses with experiments, analyze the results, draw conclusions, and if the hypothesis is corroborated, we report the results in an open, transparent manner. Now, we'll be looking at how open NIST was in their results, and actually we'll find that they won't even release the computer input data, for instance, that could save many people's lives and keep buildings from falling at free fall out of the sky. The architects and engineers are tasked with ensuring the public safety. We need to know this. But NIST said, nope, can't release this data, might jeopardize public safety. So that's a problem that we're faced with. We don't have this. Their results are not open. But so that's just a teaser as to the transparency or lack thereof from NIST. If the hypothesis is corroborated by the evidence and the experiments, if it's not corroborated, we go back and we construct another hypothesis, as you can see here. That is the scientific method in a nutshell. We're going to try to apply it now as we look at, for instance, how other towers have come down. For instance, we do have fires in high rises. Fire is an organic process, burns through an area every 20 minutes or so, and then the building, not a steel frame high rise, none of which have ever come down, but say in a wood frame building, you'd have, the building would fall to the path of least resistance asymmetrically, and it wouldn't just collapse straight down through tons of structure. Now, what might we expect in a steel frame fire? Let's see.
The way in which steel-framed buildings behave in fires depends on their construction. In this test, done by British Steel in 1995, a large amount of typical office furniture was burned to see what would happen to the heavy steel beams that supported the ceiling.
When steel is bare, when it heats up, it gets weaker. It's not that it melts in a fire. In fact, normal fires are not hot enough to melt steel. Even if you were, for example, to use an unusual fuel like kerosene, you cannot achieve temperatures hot enough to melt steel. But what happens is it starts to lose its strength. And as it loses its strength, it starts to sag. It becomes softer and sags. It can no longer support the load.
This was the largest test of its kind ever conducted. It showed how unprotected steel can be distorted, even by a normal office fire. But as is typical in steel buildings, the structural beams only slowly and progressively warped and sagged. There was no chance of a sudden collapse.
In over 20 years, I have not seen, until recently, a protected steel structure that has collapsed in a fire.
Until recently, of course, what he's referring to here, Jonathan Barnett, one of the original FEMA investigators who worked through the entire process, a number of investigations, is referring to the towers, which came down not just one, not two, but three, due to normal office fires. And that's basically the NIST interpretation. Normal office fires, even in the Twin Towers, after the planes hit, the jet fuel burned up, it's office fires after that, with of course some impact by jet plane impacts. So keep this in mind. We're building a body of research here together. We now know that in the largest test, an international historic test, 2,000-degree fires, the worst fires imaginable in any kind of office situation. You saw the stacks of kindling there. We still don't have a collapse, and that was an unprotected steel building, no fire protection. Here in Los Angeles, 3.5 hours over 8 floors, we have no collapse. Here in Philadelphia, we have 18 hours over 8 floors, no collapse. Here in Caracas, Venezuela, 17 hours this fire burned over 26 floors, no collapse. And yet these buildings, fall due to, or in an organic manner, in this case due to earthquakes. The building is not completely dismembered, its structural elements. There's a mangled building, certainly, but is recognizable as a building. Its concrete is not pulverized to powder. Here's buildings that have been exploded. We see thick, billowing, enormous pyroclastic-like clouds due to the incredible heat generated in the chemical reactions of the explosives. A thick, defined edge, almost like a solid, with these unfolding cauliflower-shaped masses. This is not typical due to fire. This is typical to the incredibly intense heat of explosions. And we have witnesses that hear the sounds of explosions. They see flashes of light. If you have these features, you know you have explosions. And explosions, of course, can be harnessed and set throughout buildings in synchronistically timed floor by floor in order to bring high rises down. This is the most common way of bringing high rises down, of course, with controlled demolition. We have features that are associated with these types of implosions. There's a sudden onset of destruction, usually at the base of the structure. This results in a straight down symmetrical collapse into the building's footprint because demolition waves remove those column supports, the thousands of tons of structural steel that was holding the building up for its life. And this results in a free fall speed often. The greatest resistance, and resulting in the total dismemberment of the steel so that they can load it up on the trucks and ship it out. There's minimal damage, of course, to it. That's the idea. One of the ideas here. There's witnesses that hear sounds of explosions and see flashes of light. Enormous clouds of pulverized plastic-like heat clouds. and squibs, or isolated explosive ejections occurring at various floors, obviously explosions. And of course, chemical evidence left behind of cutter charges from explosives or incendiaries. If you have these features, you know you have direct evidence of explosive destruction. This is not a question. And fire has not created any one of these typically, and let alone all of these features. So if we have additional features, corroborating evidence such as government documentation, that can be very helpful. Experts agree, at least those experts who may be less biased in their opinions that are offered. Foreknowledge of the destruction. These require months of planning and engineering. It doesn't happen in an afternoon. And of course, video documentation. All this is proof of controlled demolition. So we're going to take a look at Building 7 now with that in mind and see if it has any of the features of controlled demolition. It's 47 stories tall, easily the tallest building in most of our states. Maybe it looks dwarfed next to the tallest buildings in the world, which are out of scale in New York at that time, but that's another issue. This building wasn't hit by a plane like the Twin Towers. And theoretically, or according to the official story, nobody died in this building when it went down. So we're not left with the kind of the emotional baggage and the terror and the awe that was put upon us when the towers went down. So let's look dispassionately at Building 7 and see how it might have come down. What are the features of its destruction? It was indeed about a football field away from the North Tower. And so, as you can see here, it survived the initial collapse of the towers, of each of the towers, and remained standing until about 5:20 when it came down. It did have some small scattered fires in it, as you'll see, and we'll take a look at those. But here it is standing for another 7 hours or so. So are there features of controlled demolition? Let's begin and see if there's a sudden onset of destruction at the base of the structure. As Dan Rather narrates for us what may be our first look at this building's collapse.
And what you're seeing are high shots. Now, here we're going to show you a videotape of the collapse itself. Describe that. If you want to go to videotape the collapse of this building. It's an amazing, incredible picture work. For the third time today, it's reminiscent of those pictures from Vault. Too much by well-placed dynamite to knock it down.
Well, yeah, it does come down suddenly. And thank you, Dan. You're using your intuition or seeing, and we've all seen this kind of thing before, for instance, at the old hotels in Las Vegas, which we've seen on TV. And that's very helpful. But Dan has never repeated those words ever on mainstream media. And in fact, we've not seen Building 7 come down, with maybe 3 exceptions on mainstream media. Why? This is easily the 3rd largest structural failure in modern history, and most people know nothing about it. It's absolutely unconscionable. Does the building come straight down symmetrically into its footprint? Well, let's take a look here and see if that's the case. Pretty straight down, pretty symmetrical. Very helpful. From West Street, we can also see that a half a second prior to the building coming down, the penthouse or the screen wall between the 2 penthouses, or all 3 of those, are coming down instantly. That indicates core column damage, systematic, complete core column damage at the elevator shafts and surrounding. Those columns had to have been compromised all at once in order to allow that screen wall to come down a half a second. Now, this contradicts the official story, as you'll say, which says there's a 10 to 20 second collapse internally going on in the building prior to what we see here as the overall building coming down. So the official story can't be true from a number of perspectives. We'll look at those, but I'm not quite convinced yet, maybe. Let's put building 7 on the left, known controlled demolitions on the right, and see if there's any comparison here. Is there enough similarity to warrant an investigation into the possible use of explosives, especially since it looks exactly like one, and especially since fire has never brought down a skyscraper? Yeah, and yet it wasn't even seriously considered as a hypothesis in NIST's analysis and final report. It should have been the first, if not the only, hypothesis that was reviewed. These are the fires, though, that are said to have brought this building down. And these are the few small scattered fires that we see. This says that we had raging, engulfing fires in this building. Show me those fires, and I'll buy you beers for the rest of your life. The south side of building 7 had massive smoke damage. That's what we're told, but this smoke is clearly coming from building 5, which was fully engulfed, which we'll show you in a moment, and creating a negative wind pattern, which is blowing that smoke away from the corner, as you can see here. There's no massive fire or broken windows on the left side there. Otherwise, there would be if all those and all those floors were not on fire. There's only a few scattered fires in this building, so all that smoke is clearly from the neighboring building. The worst fires are here on the 11th and 12th floor, burning at 2:30, as you can see here on the left. And we know on the 5th floor that there were diesel generators. We know that they weren't burning because there's no smoke coming out of those louvers. And NIST even acknowledges that diesel fuel was not a part of the official story, even though there are those who claim, even on the floor of the American Institute of Architects annual business meeting, in which we had a resolution calling for a new investigation, somebody said, oh, diesel fuel fires brought this building down. No, it's not true. But guess what? Building 7, had column 79 in it, and the theory of the official theory of the collapse of this building suggests that there were massive fires in the northeast corner of this building under the east penthouse, because the east penthouse does collapse actually about 6-7 seconds prior to the overall collapse. So their theory focuses on this main, very heavy column at this location. And let's look at the fires first, and then we'll look at their theory. So these fires, even at 3:50 on the 12th and 13th floor, are burned out an hour and a half before the collapse of this building. Now, we're mentioning that because the theory suggests that there was thermal expansion due to these fires, which on the right side, you see NIST's fire simulation, which shows at 5 o'clock around column 79 in the lower right corner here, those fires still burning around column 79. And yet the photographs show those fires to be out. So we've done our own computer simulation on the left side here, suggesting that if there were fires around column 79, they've moved on to the other side of the building by that time. So fascinating. And let's look at this theory now. Those fires, they say, expanded through thermal expansion, these 50-foot long steel beams. Well, that's rational. They then say that it pushed this girder off of its seat. That seems rational also. On this column 79, causing this floor 13 to fall on 12 and 12 on 10 and so on. And they say that happens the 10 or 20 seconds before the overall collapse, which you've seen the videos of. There's a dozen reasons why none of this could be true. The first one is that the fires were burned out, as we noted and saw on the photographs. But even if those fires were still raging in here at the time of the collapse, because thermal expansion is a live process, it requires heat during the expansion of this beam. It couldn't have, the beam couldn't even, these beams couldn't even have expanded. They are cementitiously coated with fireproofing. So they couldn't have reached the design, the temperatures required to expand them. But in their computer model, NIST applies all of the heat, which could occur over a 20-minute period, because that's the period, of time over which the fuel in a given area in a building can burn, 20 minutes maximum. They applied all that heat in just a second and a half to these steel beams. Now, in a computer model, that would force the beams to expand rather than sag. And that's very, very, that's quite an error. We'll just call it that. And there are studs, Nelson studs, that secure these beams up to the concrete above. And what they said then is that those Nelson studs, steel studs, which make it a composite system, they popped, they broke, allowing the beam to expand differentially from the concrete floor up above, pushing this girder off of its seat. Now, the girder, by every structural engineer we've talked to, and there's been several, suggest that you wouldn't have a girder without Nelson studs when you had beams with Nelson studs. NIST claims there were no studs on the girder. That's how it pushed laterally, and which is just ludicrous. So so that wouldn't have happened even if these beams could have expanded. But even if the girder did get pushed off of its seat, this floor 13 couldn't have fallen, because as you can see, there's 3 other girders and the 3 other directions bearing on this column that would have kept that floor intact. So that doesn't make any sense either. And we've got, so we wouldn't have had a progressive collapse whatsoever. So none of this makes sense from beginning to end. And I've got this drawing here from one of the studies that have been done from this building that shows indeed that girder had 30 studs on it, as you can see here. So along with all of the beams. So we've got a real problem with our NIST report, not the least of which is the omission of this stiffener flange shown here in red, which is designed to keep the web or central member of this girder from crippling or bending sideways. Its additional feature, given its installation, and this says, oh, we didn't put in the stiffeners because the girder didn't have a web crippling problem. Well, their whole theory rests on the suggestion that this girder was pushed about 6 inches off of this plate, or 5 inches, and then the flange, the bottom member, folded, and then it fell. They know that the beams couldn't have pushed this girder far enough to completely fall off of its seat, so they say the flange actually folded under the weight. But indeed, this stiffener would have kept that flange from folding. So we've got some serious issues to look at with regard to the NIST report. Again, another one, of course, is their computer animation itself, in which you see on the right side, they've got a complete catastrophic failure from bottom to top almost, which would have caused massive buckling of the perimeter structural steel system, those columns, and deformation and breaking of granite panels and windows. But you don't see that in the video on the left whatsoever. So that doesn't make any sense. They've also released 400 structural steel connections in their computer model per second in order to get this computer model to fail as fast as the building actually failed. And even then, they can't make it fall straight down symmetrically without massive deformations, which you do actually see in their model, but not in the video, not in reality. So they're trying desperately here over a period of 7 years, while it took them to fumble this football and answer the question of how this building came down. And they still, their own computer model disproves their theory. They also stopped the computer model in 2 seconds. They don't show us what would have happened. Obviously, the building was about to tip over, which is what would happen if there was any massive structural failure down low in the building like that. So they stop it. They don't even show us the rest of the building. Even after 7 years of study, that's all we get. So the building does indeed fall into its own footprint, just about. Minimal damage to adjacent buildings, to a story about 5-6 stories tall, into a pile. So indeed, we have what looks like a typical controlled demolition from this perspective as well. Again, the initial damage from the debris is shown here, and NIST says, well, the debris damage from the collapse of World Trade Center 7 was not a significant factor. And indeed, it's the other side of the building where column 79 fails. It's the other side of the building where the worst fires were. So we certainly want an investigation into those fires, which occurred in some very interesting floors, occupied by some very interesting agencies. We'll get to that. So again, massive buckling is what we would have seen, which is shown on the computer models, but not in reality. So how do we bring a building straight down into its own footprint? Well, we have to remove all 80 columns in this building at once. And then that's on one floor, and then synchronistically timed floor by floor. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, does fire have this precision? No. Fire is an organic process. It moves through a building every 20 minutes or so in a given area, looking for fresh new fuel sources. Any collapse by fire in a skyscraper, which has never happened, would happen only organically. The building would tip over, as you even saw their computer model. How fast does the building come down? Is it at free fall? Well, let's listen to physics teacher David Chandler.
We can measure the downward acceleration of Building 7 by video frame analysis. I used a magnifying glass to place markers on the corner of the building on each frame. From this, we can get a data table and various graphs. The slope of this graph indicates acceleration, which is shown here to be about minus 10.279 plus or minus 0.6. Free fall in a vacuum is minus 9.8 in these units. That falls within the margin of error of this measurement. In other words, the rate of fall of Building 7 in the first few seconds is indistinguishable from free fall in a vacuum.
Well, that's pretty important. I mean, let's just take a look at this. NIST admits in its final report, after David Chandler confronted them publicly and embarrassed them into saying, hey, this is easily measurable. It's free fall. Oh, we'll go look at that. Well, in their final report, they come back and say, oh, you're right. For a third of this building's fall, a third of the 7-second fall, it fell at free fall. But they don't acknowledge the implications of that. Here you can see the building gaining downward momentum with increasing distance with each second. That's acceleration. Fits the free fall curve perfectly. It's as if 8 stories were all of a sudden magically removed from this building. That's the resistance that kept that building from falling. Those columns are 5 times stronger than they need to be to support that building. That's the safety factor involved here. How did every one of them, all of a sudden, not provide any resistance? Not even while it was buckling, crushing. That takes time. Well, and it also results in the total dismemberment of the steel structure. We had a moment-resisting steel frame skyscraper that is completely dismembered, like a house of cards. Remember, buildings that fall due to natural causes, we don't have the complete dismembering of the structural steel system, as we see here in earthquake examples again, resulting also in minimal damage to adjacent structures, as you can see. Do we have witnesses that hear sounds of explosion?
And then it was like another 2-3 seconds. You heard explosions, like boom. It's like a distinct sound. It's not like when in compression, like boom, 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 like floors that were dropping and collapsing. This was boom, and like you felt a rumble in the ground, like almost like you wanted to grab onto something. To me, I knew that was an explosion. There was no doubt in my mind.
I'm going to call in Bill Rosati. He was here when it all happened. He saw it for himself. Bill, if you can just tell us what you saw, what you heard.
I was standing like 2 blocks away, and all of a sudden I just seen a big flash, and then I seen the building coming down, and I just seen people just running everywhere, chaotic like.
Wow. This is very important. How many of these witnesses of explosions do you imagine ended up in the final report of NIST? And there's been hundreds in the case of the Twin Towers and dozens in the case of Building 7. Not one. Not one. Something happened to the reports of explosions.
When we got to the 8th floor, I started walking to one side of the building. That side of the building was gone. The first explosion I heard when I was on the stairwell landing, when we made it down to the 6th floor. Then we made it back to the 8th floor. I heard some more explosions.
Also the sound.
Like a boom, like an explosion.
More than one?
Yes. We started walking down the stairs. We made it to the 8th floor. Big explosion. Blew us back into the 8th floor. When we get outside, a police officer comes to me and says, "You have to run. We have more information of bombs, so you have to run."
Well, and here's a bomb, actually, on the in the afternoon of 9/11. And tell me what you hear.
Yeah, here's one of the guys who can tell you I'm okay, all right? Here, hold on. You want to call your mother or something?
Nope, nothing's reported in the way of bombs in the official reports. Is there chemical evidence of cutter charges? We'll come back to this next week when we get to week 3, a week from today, when we get into, actually week 4 is where we have this evidence, the second half of our Twin Towers webinar section. But for now, we have direct evidence of explosive destruction. Eight of these features we've shown you today, and fire has not shown any of these, let alone all of these features. So very, very interesting. Like these fires, for instance, in World Trade Center Building 5, very hot, large, and long-lasting fire. Did it collapse? Let's see. Nope. Mid-rise, high-rise structural steel skyscrapers do not collapse due to fire. Not even here in the Mandarin Hotel, which is burning clearly from floor to ceiling. Did it collapse? Well, here's before on the left, here's after on the right, slightly toasted around the edges, no collapse. Hasn't happened before, and yet these small scattered fires in this 47-story skyscraper brought this mammoth building down in 6.5 seconds into a pile like a house of cards. Not going to happen. How about FEMA? What did we learn from the FEMA report? There's been some official investigations here. We had initially a set of volunteers in 2001 by the American Society of Civil Engineers. Well, these are the same volunteers led by the same person, Gene Corley, who was responsible for other major terrorist attacks, including Oklahoma City and others. And we'll be taking a look at Gene's work. And he progressed into the FEMA report, joined by others, which had $600,000 worth of funding. And then we have the Con Edison electrical substation, which is a huge substation underneath the building 7. It was built on top of this station, which it pre-existed. It got crushed. So Con Edison sued Silverstein and said, hey, you destroyed my electrical substation, you're going to pay for it. Well, they lost the suit, but in the process, they had yet another report, which is interesting to look at, but outside the scope of our investigation today. We're focusing on the 2005 NIST report. Well, this is 2005, they came out with the actual Twin Towers report. They had, and we'll get to that, they had $20 million worth of funding, 3 years, and fascinating study. The point I want to make here is that these individuals worked on this, many of them, from the very beginning through the end. These are not 3 different independent reports. That's the point to make here, including when Popular Mechanics came out with their rather spurious effort to support the official theory and so forth. So FEMA, in their investigation, suggests that the collapse of World Trade Center 7 had a small debris field as the facade was pulled downward, suggesting internal failure and implosion. Fascinating. They also, well, we also find that the 9/11 Commission completely ignored the World Trade Center 7. In fact, without explanation, it doesn't even discuss the collapse. Max Cleland, who resigned from the commission, cited it's a national scandal. The investigation, the 9/11 Commission, is now compromised. That's pretty important information. We'll come back to that in future weeks. And then we have Jonathan Barnett of the FEMA report that says this.
We were surprised that Tower 7 collapsed. We being the team that investigated what occurred on that day.
So the investigators were surprised by the collapse. They'd never seen a 47-story, any skyscraper collapse due to fire. And yet, as you'll see, the firefighters were given a different story. They were told that the building is going to collapse. In fact, one anonymous engineer suggests that it was going to collapse about 5 o'clock, which is fascinating because that's when it did, of course, collapse, 5:20. We have some interesting expert opinions here. Hugo Bachmann, PhD, chairman of the Department of Structural Dynamics in Switzerland. He says, in my opinion, the building WTC 7 was with great probability professionally demolished. And Kamal Obeid, a localized failure in a steel frame building like World Trade Center 7 cannot cause a catastrophic collapse like a house of cards without a simultaneous and patterned loss of several of its columns at key locations within the building. He's one of 70 or 80 structural engineers signed on to our petition demanding a new investigation. Of course, you have to, people know in advance when these buildings are going to be coming down. Do we have foreknowledge? Well, here's the fire chief, Nick Visconti. We're moving the command post over this way. That building's coming down. Wow. They know that for the first time in history, due to fires alone, that a structural steel building is going to come down. Does this make it unsafe for our firefighters today to go into a burning fire with a few small scattered fires in skyscrapers? No, they continue to go into them and put them out. They don't have fear of collapse. But on this day, they knew in advance. In fact, Indira Singh suggests, because Building 7 was going to come down or was being brought down, that's what she's told. She's an EMT worker who was doing triage work right there. Did they actually use the words brought down? And who was telling you this? It's fire department. They're going to have to bring it down. They actually told her that they are going to have to bring it down, which is fascinating because that's consistent with one of the controversial statements by Larry Silverstein a year later on PBS TV, in which he says, well, there's been such terrible loss of life. I was talking to the fire commander, and maybe the smartest thing to do was pull it. And so they gave the order to pull, and we watched the building come down. That's a pretty fascinating quote. Of course, he says, oh, I meant pull the firemen out of the building. Well, the firemen weren't even in the building. They were told not to put out the fire. They were told the building's gonna come down. So the story is just not straight. Nor is it here with this example of these construction workers who are seen walking away from Building 7, hearing an explosion, looking back over their shoulder at the building, then looking straight into the CNN camera and saying this.
Keep your eye on that building. It'll be coming down. This building is about to blow up. Move it back. All right, guys. We are walking back. It's a building about to blow up. Hopefully, debris coming down.
So, of course, here they're saying the building's going to blow up. It's about to blow up. Flame and how do they know the building is about to blow up? Fires don't blow up buildings. At least not typically in skyscrapers. That's not a concern. Is the hypothesis corroborated of controlled demolition to you? So this is the question for today. Have we shown at least 8 of the key features of controlled demolition? Is this direct evidence of explosive destruction? Can fire create any of these features? Can it create all of these features? With additional corroborating evidence, data from the FEMA and NIST reports, the testimony of these first responders, whistleblowers, experts, and with the foreknowledge, does this add up to you beyond a reasonable doubt? Is this proof of controlled demolition? That's what we want to know, and we're going to give you an opportunity to tell us that. But we want to encourage you to take some action, write your elected representatives, your local and national television, radio, newspaper, magazines. There's things you can do. You can send the AE911Truth.org link to everybody you know and say, hey, there's 2,500 architects and engineers who are calling for a new investigation. What do you think about this? You can do that without sticking your neck out too far. We'll stick our necks out. You can get our 50-page booklet, Beyond Misinformation, right there below. If you're on our website watching this, there's a link for you. And you can get on our newsletter, of course, too. And beyondmisinformation.org gives you even more information about this booklet. Our latest effort to putting out the evidence to the academic and professional community of architects and engineers. You can support us in a number of ways. You can become a member of AE911Truth for $5 a month, if you like, or more. That's very important to help us continue our work. But you can also volunteer. Andy's here to tell us a little bit more about the volunteer efforts. Andy?
Hi, thank you, Richard. So as you've heard, there's a lot of great evidence here and a lot of big issue that we've got to do something about. So to volunteer, all you simply need to do is go to AE911Truth.org. There's a section at the top you can where you can volunteer, get involved, and you just put in some basic information, some contact info, and we'll be getting in touch with you. There's a lot of great tasks that we need to fill right now, positions to fill, involving sending the Beyond Misinformation booklet to architects all over the country, structural engineers, other groups, people that need to hear about this. Also doing the necessary research to find out who are these people that we need to reach out to, whether they be physicists, chemists, people who have a vested interest in this issue and have the authority and knowledge to do something about it. There's also great outreach actions you can do, reaching out to your city council. We'll instruct you on how to do that. Reach out to Congress. So again, just go to AE911Truth.org and fill out the volunteer form, and we will be in touch with you.
Great, and it's important that we look at. I mean, if there's any question about 9/11, which started 2 wars in which over 1 million people have perished, a $4.5 trillion global war on terror, and the loss of many of our civil liberties, we owe it to ourselves to get to the root of the problem. And World Trade Center 7's collapse is a very clean way to do that, as we talked about earlier. So that's the reason we're looking at this. Yes, it's almost 15 years old now, but Andy, are there other reasons that you're aware of that people will motivate people to get more involved in this issue?
Sure. I mean, yeah, it was 15 years ago, but as time passes and as we move further and further away from this incident, a lot of the emotional impact has been kind of worn down, I've seen, and more people are willing to accept this. There's a lot of things going on in this country right now, making people open their eyes, be willing to look at 9/11 with a more skeptical eye, and be willing to look at this information and just as I said before, do it without the emotion and be very left-brained in how they analyze it. And that's kind of what we need right now. So we have...
right on.
Go ahead.
What were you going to say, Andy?
Oh, no, like I said, we have a lot of people now who are willing to look at this information who may not have been willing to look at it before. And we've even had some positive words from congressmen who said on live TV a couple of years ago that we should keep on asking questions about this and that it should be investigated.
All right. So it's very important for people to follow up and get informed. And of course, we have a store at AE911Truth, and many of these videos, like this one I'm going to show you the trailer of, you can watch for free on YouTube, the hour-long version, and there's a 90-minute version in our store, which is at the top of the website. What you can do, you'll find the store there, and there's all kinds of information, brochures, DVDs, and even for people who really want to, go out and promote conversation, you can put on a hat and a T-shirt, and there's all kinds of resources for your work in getting the information out. But this one is the key piece. It is the DVD documentary that we made, and it includes 40 high-rise architects, structural engineers, metallurgists, chemists, physicists, controlled demolition experts, all laying out the evidence for the explosive demolition of all 3 of these towers. Let's take a couple of minutes here and look at this fascinating information.
Conspiracy theories, there are lots of them. They can go on, we can speculate on that forever. What we really need to know is how those buildings came down.
World Trade Center 7 collapsed because of fires fueled by office furnishings. It did not collapse from explosives or from fuel oil fires.
To undermine scientific integrity is to undermine our democracy.
This is what NIST has done, denied and ignored crucial evidence.
The American people absolutely need the truth of 9/11.
More than 1,500 architects and engineers and 12,000 others, including many scientists, have signed the petition calling for a scientific investigation of the destruction of the Twin Towers and World Trade Center Building 7. The report, issued by the National Institute of Standards and Technology, was not valid science.
They're talking about a single columnar collapse or failure that resulted in a total collapse of the building.
Building number 7 descended in free fall for the first 100 feet, which means that there was absolutely no resistance to descent whatsoever.
So all of the columns really needed to be severed at the same time.
The symmetry is the smoking gun.
NIST has admitted it went into free fall for 8 stories.
You don't need to be an engineer or an architect to see what happened to those buildings.
What I saw, it was a classic implosion. The center of the core, the penthouse area, starts to move first, and then the building follows along with it.
NIST excluded the document from FEMA in Appendix C that documented the evidence of melting steel.
In an office fire, you cannot generate to melt steel.
There were these iron microspheres present in all of the dust samples. They needed to have been formed in extremely high temperatures.
All the characteristics of the microspheres, along with what I see in the attack of the beams that were actually found, tell me that thermite was involved.
In the dust, what we have found is a modern version of thermite, which we call nanothermite.
NIST concedes that they found no evidence for explosives. So then we asked them what, and they said, no, we did not look for explosives or residues of explosives.
And in fact, the evidence is overwhelming that these red gray crystals are very high temperature incendiaries.
And we have watched as scientific integrity has been undermined, scientific research politicized in an effort to advance predetermined ideological agendas.
If this is a crime, I think everybody agrees it's a crime. Removed from the scene of the crime. You can't do science when you are deprived of the evidence and when your hypothesis is the least valid instead of the most likely. And the most likely hypothesis in the case of Building 7 wasn't even mentioned.
So we encourage everyone to host a screening of this incredible film to get the word out. It's really all that good. When we come back, we'll answer questions here in just a minute. But I want you to know what we're going to be looking at in week 3. Now that's a week from today. We do have another a session of week 2. The same presentation that we had today will be occurring on Sunday at 4 p.m. And then we come back next Thursday again at 1 p.m. With week 3, where we'll look at World Trade Center 1 and 2 with an overview, looking at its sudden near freefall collapse, looking at the pulverization of 90,000 tons of concrete, laterally ejected structural steel elements at 60 miles an hour, landing 600 feet in every direction, with the shattering of the complete structural steel system down to all the way down to the ground. So we've got a lot to look at there. But at this point, Andy, I'm sure we have some questions from our viewing audience.
Yes, we do. Lots of good questions coming in. The first one I have is, was the foundation of Building 7 at all compromised?
NIST does not go into detail about the foundation of Building 7, does not suggest that it was compromised. Their initiation of collapse is at floor 12 and 13, and that's where they focus most of their attention.
Okay. The next question I have here, it says that the structural engineer of the Petronas Towers, those are two twin towers in Malaysia, and WTC 7 Charles Thornton says that, and actually this is regarding World Trade Center 1 and 2, which we're going to be covering later, but it says that World Trade Center 1 and 2 were cheap garbage, and the Port Authority didn't have to follow building code standards, so I assume that since his company built Building 7, it was up to codes and standards. Can you comment on that, Richard? I'm not sure if you've heard that comment or not.
Yeah, building, we'll get to the Twin Towers construction and the robustness of its engineering and construction in week 3. But for Building 7, our understanding is that it had to meet all of the codes at the time, and it did not have the exceptions that the Port Authority, that the Twin Towers did under the jurisdiction of the Port Authority, which was a separate from the city, so it didn't have to run through the building department. But in the case of Building 7, that's a private development by Larry Silverstein and his crew, and we have no suggestion on the part of NIST that there was the official story that there was structural inadequacies.
Okay, I have another question regarding the burnt vehicles, and it says, was the street with the vehicles and bus burned to a crisp, was this behind World Trade Center 7, opposite side of the building from the Twin Towers? So was that street behind World Trade Center 7, this person wants to know?
Yeah, I don't know where any particular buses or cars might have been. There were cars all around that received severe heat damage. I think that's the main point here. And if in week 4, we'll be looking at the evidence of tons and tons and tons, dozens of tons of incendiaries, and lots and lots of evidence for that, which is, of course, 4,000 degrees dropping down on people and cars down below. So that could easily explain much of the phenomena that has been questioned, such as the tops of these cars being toasted.
I just had a question come in regarding where they can get information that we have. It says, where can I find a copy of the chart you displayed showing that mostly the same individuals worked on the government, FEMA, and NIST reports, as well as the popular mechanics pieces? Thank you.
If you go to our website and you click Contact Us and ask for that, I'll send you that slide. It is pretty revealing to learn that these are not independent investigations whatsoever, that the same leaders appear throughout all of them.
I have a question here, and it kind of goes to a point you made earlier. I think this is a question that I always ask myself too, is if all it takes to bring down a skyscraper in the US is an office fire, shouldn't all skyscrapers be closed until the problem is corrected? How do you deal with this dilemma, Richard?
This is a huge question, not only for the safety of the occupants of these buildings, which there's 100 office fires a year in skyscrapers. And many of them, actually most of them, are much hotter, longer lasting, and larger than the fires that we see in Building 7. So if these small scattered fires can compromise a skyscraper in a matter of hours to bring the building down in a matter of seconds, then the viewer is absolutely correct. It's a huge problem. And NIST did make some recommendations in addition to exiting and fireproofing in these skyscrapers. They made some recommendations for structural improvements, but guess what? They have not been incorporated into the International Building Code at all. And we've had almost 15 years since 9/11, and at least 10 years since these recommendations came out. So yes, we have a huge problem because there are long span beams, which is the source of the concern that NIST cites in hundreds of skyscrapers. But this is not seen as a problem by the profession, by architects, by structural engineers, by fire protection engineers, or by building code officials. And that's a huge discrepancy that we've not been able to achieve awareness and recognition of on the part, particularly of the American Institute of Architects, of which I'm a member, and which we've been lobbying for 10 years now.
And we have one more question, and I just want to remind the audience, there's a lot of great questions coming in here, but we're going to try to keep on the topic of this current webinar. So for those people interested in nanothermite and the Twin Towers, we ask you to come back in later weeks, particularly week 4, where Richard will be talking about the extreme temperatures and getting into the nanothermite evidence there, and we can address some of the questions at that time surrounding that. But for our last question, it's just asking you to comment on the number of architects and engineers who are not even aware of Building 7 and who have, by default of not knowing it, never even questioned the collapse of that building. Just any comments on that?
Now, interestingly enough, Andy, as you were reading that question, I got a note from another one of our wonderful staff member, actually Ted Walter, who was responsible for putting together this webinar series and aiding you and I. And I want people to understand this because I don't want to misspeak. So I'm going to go back to the last question. I apologize, Andy. People should be aware that there is quite a misunderstanding on the part of many of us who are researching Building 7. While Silverstein built and controlled World Trade Center 7 from the beginning, he did own it. He didn't actually own it. It's a 99-year lease on Port Authority land. And so I won't get into the detail that Ted provides here, but that may imply that Building 7 was also its building code review and permitting process was also under the authority of the Port Authority. So that's an open question for right now, and I just wanted to acknowledge that. And Andy, if you wouldn't mind restating your question there.
Sure. I was just asking you to comment on the number of architects and engineers who are not even aware of the destruction of Building 7, and then by default from that, of course, don't question it because they're not aware that this controversy even exists. Just your comment on that, please.
Yeah, we've also heard that, well, there's 80,000 architects in the American Institute of Architects that are members, and they all disagree with you. Well, no. We find when we go to the conferences, 2 or 3 a year, and we show them Building 7, first of all, most of them are completely unaware that there was a third skyscraper, as I mentioned, and they're shocked, and they're open-minded to look at it, most of them. And even the evidence for the Twin Towers, many of them are open-minded. When they look at the evidence, they end up agreeing with us. I've done 500 presentations around the world in 38 foreign countries and 95 American cities to groups of 100 to 2,500, and often to small groups of mostly architecture and engineering professionals. And after reviewing our evidence, almost always we have all the hands going up saying, yeah, we need a new investigation. And they agree with us that these are controlled demolitions. And so it's people who have not or will not particularly look at the evidence that will call us names like conspiracy theorists or whatever, even though we don't have any conspiracy theories. We're just talking about forensic evidence here, eyewitness testimony, video testimony. So this is why we're working so hard to educate the profession. We're getting no help from the American Institute of Architects other than that they do allow us to bring our booth full of evidence to their conventions. Of course, we have to raise $4,000 every time from our wonderful and supportive activists and members to do that. But they will allow us to submit a resolution, which we are doing again this year, 2016, in Philadelphia at the annual AIA convention, a resolution calling upon the American Institute of Architects to call for a new investigation. No cost to them. It's a statement, position statement. And we have 100 AIA members backing that resolution. That's a lot of weight. And yet quite a bit of opposition and denial and ignorance last year. And we hope to put a major dent in that ignorance this year when we go back in May, late May, to Philadelphia. Andy, can you add anything to that?
Regarding the AIA resolution, as Richard said, we got a lot of people working very hard. We have submitted that. We expect that it should be accepted to be voted on. And this is why we got to educate as many people as possible and get as many volunteers to help us out as possible, because we are sending the Beyond Misinformation book to architects all over the country. And we're hoping that by the time the AIA resolution is voted on, all of them will have had a chance to review the information if they choose to read it. So, you know, you want to be a part of this. This is interesting times in American history. And just because they're not reporting about this whole information push and education effort going on with AE911Truth, just because they're not reporting on it in the front page of the New York Times doesn't mean it's not happening and that we don't need as many people to partake in this as possible. Richard, do you want to take one more question?
Sure.
All right. This is actually a good one, and I wanted to ask you for this person. It says, if all of the support columns of World Trade Center 7 were cut simultaneously, as stated by the engineers for 9/11 that would require a large amount of explosives to be detonated at the same time. I've seen 23 different videos of the collapse of World Trade Center 7 and have not heard any sound of explosions. So can you address that?
Yeah, I think it's important to note that the videos don't carry explosions as well. We did have one explosion in this particular video, but it was like a block away. The videos of Building 7 were anywhere from 6 blocks to miles away, and so that's important. But there is an analysis, a very detailed analysis performed once again by David Chandler, a physics teacher, and that's available at 911speakout.org, 911speakout.org. And he does a very careful analysis of one of the videos in which he documents explosions. And we showed you at least 3 witnesses of explosions. We showed you Barry Jennings, who was in the building with attorney Michael Hess, who were experiencing explosions. And I say experiencing, I mean blown around inside the building by explosions before the building went down, hours before. The building, there was a few fires, but not where they were experiencing explosions. So these are probably, we speculate, preparatory explosions. So that's really important. The eyewitness testimony is as important as the video testimony, particularly in this case.
Okay, that is the last of the questions that we have. One moment. And just to comment too, that the video Richard was just referencing is called Sound Evidence for Explosions. If the people want to Google it, it's put up by David Chandler. But that is it. We are done with the question and answer session, and we are done with this webinar for today. But I do want to remind the audience that these webinars are not over. They are continuing every Thursday and Sunday. every Thursday at this same time that today's started. That's 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific. Sunday, we will be back at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific. They'll be talking about World Trade Center 7 in depth some more. So come back if you want to hear more about this subject. Bring somebody else who is new to it. And we want to thank you for attending today.
Thanks, everybody. And then week 3, don't forget, we got the Twin Towers starting. And thanks, Andy, for all your help. And we'll see all of you. If you have more questions, go ahead and submit that form. We'll try to get to them. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.